Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode 201. Intimacy during injuries. So this is kind of an interesting and I almost want to say funny topic, even though it's not, but it's not one that we talk about very often. But what happens to our sex life, our intimate life, when a spouse has injuries? And what happens when both spouses have injuries? So we're going to talk a little bit about this. Recently, I had some health issues that really prevented my husband and I from being intimate for a certain amount of time. But then something even more crazy happened. Last week on Memorial Day, my husband was in an explosion. Yeah, this was crazy. And I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but I will say he was trying to light a fire that was kind of down in a pit, and it wasn't at ground level. And normally, if you're going to start a fire at ground level, the fumes are able to kind of dissipate and leave if you use lighter fluid or gas or whatever. There's a place for the fumes to go. But when you're down in a pit, the fumes get trapped. There's no place and no way for them to escape since it's heavier than air. So it just kind of sinks and it gathers and it collects. And so when you go to light that fire, for Nick, it created a massive explosion. All of our neighbors could hear it. It was a loud boom. Everyone came running. I was at the grocery store, so I wasn't even there when it happened. But needless to say, there were some effects from this explosion. Nick got burned. He sustained first, second, and third degree burns all on one side of his face, his entire right arm and hand, and his left hand have major burns on it. And so this has been a very interesting experience for us. A new one for sure, right? Nick has never been in an explosion before. He's definitely been around fires before and had a great understanding of how they work and could, try to predict from all of his experience how lighting a fire would go. But there was unforeseen things. It was a new circumstance for him of going down into a pit to light the fire that created this explosion. So what happens to intimacy when all these things are taking place? The interesting thing is that some of my clients are also facing injuries right now. And we've had some really good discussions about what does this mean for intimacy? How is this going to affect just some of the physical challenges we now face with intercourse and being connected? And the biggest challenge I see, and even with Nick and myself, is that there is a tendency to fall into a trap, a thinking trap. And this is the trap of all or nothing thinking. And what that would look like is maybe the husband's like, yeah, one of us is injured or both of us is injured, but like, I still want to be intimate, right? I still want to have sex. And often the wife is like, okay, there's some injuries here. Let's not have it at all. And so we end up going into complete opposites where the wife is like, there shouldn't be any sex because of injuries. And the husband's like, well, we could still have sex despite the injuries. And so we fall into these opposing thoughts and opposing positions, and we kind of sink into those and dig our heels into them and become a little bit more stubborn on them, both feeling very justified in the way that we are thinking about it and viewing it. And so sometimes we find that this happens during injuries and even in life, right? Even sometimes without injuries, we can become very stubborn, very stuck in our ways. And we think that the way that we are thinking is the best way and it is the right way. And when we do that, we start to look at our spouse as like, gosh, what is going on with them? What's wrong with them, right? We start to have really negative thoughts about them. And sometimes we may even try to keep things super safe, right? And a wife who's not interested in sex during the time of injuries might be like, well, that's the safe thing to do, is to not have intercourse. And a husband might be thinking it's the safe thing to do is to have sex, because otherwise we're just going to lose all types of connections and things are going to get worse. And how are we going to continue moving forward if we just eliminate this? And so we both try to keep things very safe. And in an attempt to do so, what we may not realize, it's kind of like the fumes gathering in this pit. We don't always realize what's happening, is that we may be avoiding something that actually needs our attention. Because if we don't, it could gather and collect and build up, and it may make things worse than just actually addressing it. Doesn't mean just giving in and jumping over to your spouse's side. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying don't necessarily avoid talking through things or just taking a look at it or having new discussions about it. Because with relationship challenges, and especially with intimacy challenges, we often avoid them. We often don't know how to talk about them in a way that's helpful, beneficial, or productive. And even when we do try, sometimes it just falls apart. We don't have the skills to do so. And so the challenges that we face in our relationship and with intimacy just continue to build up. There's nowhere for those things to go, right? And what ends up happening is that when challenges build up, it can make things even worse. It can make things more dangerous, more volatile. And we may not even realize it, but that buildup could lead to an explosion in the relationship where things just get worse. And so I want to relate this to some of Nick's injuries, because there were some very interesting lessons that him and I were able to discuss during this whole process. And it only happened 7 days ago. But when we went to the ER, I remember there was a point when one of the nurses said to us, things will never be the same. And that was a very interesting thing to consider when it came to Nick's skin and his burns and what that meant for his future and how he would function and experience things. And yes, maybe they will never be the same, but that doesn't necessarily mean things are going to be worse. Just because something's not the same doesn't mean things are worse. And in fact, as we've gone through this process together, looking at these injuries and dealing with them and facing them and working through them, we have actually found that there are a lot of things, a lot of silver linings, a lot of blessings. And we can view things as like, you know what? Yeah, they're not going to be the same. Maybe things will be better, right? Because our awareness through this experience has expanded so much. And all that new knowledge that we are gaining through this experience, man, things I think are better. Yeah, we're still going to have to learn to make some adjustments in life, but I think it can be very easy to say, oh yeah, things will never be the same. They're going to be worse. We can assume they will be worse. But what if we just start thinking maybe they'll be better? This is so valuable in relationships to think going through hard things, crappy things can actually make things better. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about 3 things that could really help when it comes to challenges and intimacy, just some of the realities of when there are injuries, what we can do, and how these 3 tips can help us move forward and through our injuries in a way that is growing and beneficial to each spouse. So the first one is don't downplay, don't delay. And what I mean by this is don't downplay that there is something that needs to be addressed. With Nick, when he first was caught in this ball of fire during this explosion, he thought, okay, well, at least my clothes are not on fire. My hair is not on fire. I don't see anything on fire. So I'm probably okay. So he started to kind of downplay it in the beginning. And within about an hour, he was trying to address some of the burns and the burning sensation that started to show up within the hour. He was thinking, well, I can address this myself, right? He was taking a cold shower. He was trying to go through the process of treating burns. And he realized that he is going to need some professional help, some eyes on by a trained professional to really address the situation. And so there came a point where when I got home, I was grocery shopping. When I got home after this explosion, I walked in and I looked at him and I was like, well, something's not right here. And he said to me, I need you to take me to the ER. And I knew immediately that that was true. This was a little bit beyond just home care. And Nick first thought, like, I'm just a little bit burned. I'm just a little bit burned, but I'll be okay. So I have a feeling, and through my experience as a coach, that sometimes if there's an issue in our relationship, in the marriage, or when it comes to intimacy, we can kind of downplay things, right? Like, oh, this will work itself out. This is not a big deal. We don't really need to talk through these things. And we can think that we're just a little bit burned and that we're going to be okay. But it's important to also know that there are times when we actually need to take a closer look at things. And if we don't, it's extremely possible that things will get worse. Things will get worse if we don't address them. Things will get worse if we don't get eyes on from a professional who's trained in these things. And we might end up with infections that are much harder to treat and can make our situation actually exponentially worse than just maybe a little bit worse. And if we're already not feeling so good, if we're already feeling burned, we're already having some pain, why spend more time being miserable, right? Why delay the healing process? Why delay relief? But we do this. We do this. So we end up keeping ourselves in a state of misery much longer than we need to. We can get help pretty quickly if we don't delay. We just make the decision, you know what? It's time to go. It's time to get some help. Let's start this process. Even knowing that we have made a decision to get help can already bring us so much relief. And so this is a really good insight, not just for physical injuries, but also mental and emotional injuries that may have taken place within the marriage, within the relationship, even with sex. right? Sometimes we hold on to really negative thoughts and memories that are causing injury, even self-harm. We don't think about it in that way, but man, I remember listening to a podcast that called it like self-violence. When we continue to hold on to super negative feelings and thoughts that create all this negativity within ourselves when we don't have to do that. They called it self-violence. And that really stood out to me. So we don't always know how far reaching the effects of an injury will be. So having professional insight can be super, super helpful. We can start to heal right away instead of months or years later when things are worse. We have to realize that sometimes an injury will go through its own process before it manifests, before it actually shows up, right? When we explode as a spouse because we've been holding things or suppressing things for so long that we just explode. And it's important to remember that we can't always know what's going on beneath the surface, right? So this was definitely true for my husband's physical injuries, his burns. When we got to the ER, they knew right away, like, we're going to have to take care of some business immediately. And they were going to have to debride his skin, which means they cut, scrape, clean. They have to get all that burnt skin off so they can look at the deeper layers of skin, not just the surface level. They have to see how deep that injury goes so they can come up with the best plan for healing. And that's kind of what we need to do as well as couples, right? We've got to get to the deeper issues, the root of things, not just surface level things, but actually say, you know what, we may need some help with this. We may need the help of a coach, the help of a therapist to really look at the deeper things and get to those root causes, not just these surface level things. So that's tip number one. Don't downplay and don't delay. Tip number two is follow instructions for rapid recovery. Burns are no joke. When you have severe burns and these severe wounds, it's not like you heal in 2 days. Like, this is a long process that Nick is going to go through. But even by us following the directions of the nurses and the doctors, like to the T, at our follow-up appointment, they were like, this is amazing progress. This is amazing progress in the healing process for Nick's injuries. They could see that there is new skin starting to grow and develop in the right way. But what's very interesting, and this is why I'm so grateful that there are professionals who are trained to look at the details of things. There was one little piece of Nick's skin where they're like, this part is not healing correctly. And this is going to need a different treatment plan than what we are doing for the rest of this skin on his arm. And I was like, show me what is different. Like, because if I'm looking at this as an untrained, person in the medical field, it looks great. It looks like it's healing, but why? What do you see that I don't that helps you understand this is not healing? And so the nurse was able to point out, like, look what this skin is doing right here, which is different than this skin. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't even notice that detail. And how interesting it is that for different sections of Nick's skin, it requires different game plans, different approaches, different methods. There are different instructions. And the more we are able to follow those instructions, the better the healing process will go. And it seems like maybe perhaps we were missing, this maybe this little strip of skin in our attempts to put on the ointments the right way and stuff. But also the nurse was explaining that this is the body's own attempt to heal, and it has overcorrected and has now produced some other chemical or whatever they called it in efforts to heal, but it is kind of having the opposite effect. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is reminding me so much of couples who really try to improve their situation, and they may start trying to use all kinds of different skills or techniques, or if I just do this thing a little bit more, it's probably going to help. And usually what that means is if I dig my heels in even more into the way I'm doing things and really demand that things go my way, I know that this is going to solve our relationship issues. When often that doesn't work, right? Our over attempts to dig in even more can make things a little bit worse. And so this is the value of having a coach and an outside professional say, wait a minute, we need to take a look at this one little detail, right? This is the beauty of thought work, because it's often one thought that we don't realize could be wreaking so much havoc in our relationship, in our marriage, even in our sex life. It's sometimes just one or two thoughts that are an attempt to fix and correct, and they end up having the opposite effect and can really hold off the healing process. And so this reminded me to really advocate for anyone listening to this to really get outside help. Somebody who's trained to look at the details of your sex life, of the way you're thinking about things, of how your feelings are showing up, the root cause of your feelings in the relationship, and how that all relates to sex and your sex life. Doing so can really, really get to the root cause and allow you to come up with the game plan specific for that, right? Because if other things are working, we don't need to make adjustments there. We need to make adjustments in the things that are not working, even when we have the best of intentions. I see this all the time with couples, right? It's like, well, we're both smart. We're both really trying. We're both trying to make steps in the right direction, but it's usually based in their own ideas instead of like what is proven to actually work. So we need to follow instructions from the professionals, because those are the things that are actually going to work. So when it comes to each of our sex lives, being able to follow the instructions of a coach can make all the difference. So we don't have a husband on one page, a wife on another page, and the actions they're taking are in complete opposition of each other and not really helping things progress or heal. But you guys can get on the same page, learning the same effective skills. And that can make a huge, huge difference. For example, I'm sure you guys have heard me talk about the intimacy trek, right? That is the number of steps, the order of steps when it comes to having sex, the sexual and intimate journey, right? Out in the world, we're not taught the complete journey. We're taught a small fraction of it. So no wonder husbands are frustrated that their wives are never in the mood, and wives are frustrated that their husband's always in the mood. It's because we're lacking so much information. We're lacking the skill of following a system, following the steps in order, and knowing that we're on the same page and that it's going to work if we do that. And also another trap I see is that couples often don't have effective communication skills. And so when things are challenging, man, sometimes we may even try to communicate like, oh, hey, we're having discussions about it, but it doesn't really take us anywhere, right? Because usually if we don't know better, we're going to do a lot of blaming, and that really blocks effective communication. It inhibits our ability to be a good listener and to entertain ideas in a way where we're not offended or hurt, and we don't tap into the higher part of our thinking skills. So we often lack those when we try to address issues. But a professional would be able to say, okay, here are some clear communication skills that will help you get through difficult challenges and help you progress and move forward and help with the healing process. Okay, so tip number 3 is approach your challenges, your intimacy, your injuries, whatever it is, with a creative collaboration mindset, right? Not just like, hey, I want to fix. But this is going to be a collaborative effort. That means there's going to be some flexibility. There's going to be a sense of like, let's be open to all sorts of ideas, out of the box ideas, right? This is the time to like maybe think, hey, it's okay to color outside the lines sometimes. Like, let's really talk through this and be creative and inventive and have that mindset that we can look at things through better lenses, multiple lenses, and be able to say, okay, let's take the advice from a professional and how can we have some thoughts that make this fun, make it romantic, make it entertaining, and have it be a new experience for you guys as a couple, right? So recently I've had some clients with some injuries, a leg injury, knee surgery, and it's really starting to challenge like just certain positions when it comes to sex and even the desire to be intimate in any way, shape, or form. And so are we talking about this? Are we just having conversations where there's just like 1 or 2 sentences thrown out and hoping that the other spouse will jump on board to whatever it is that we want to do when it comes to intimacy? What if we just started to say, you know what, like this is a great time to have more conversation. Let's open it up. Let's talk about how to find the humor in this. So Nick and I did this recently with his injuries, with some of the things I was going through physically as well. We actually had a conversation where we were like, what would it be like if we tried to have sex right now? Like, what would that look like if we just allowed our brain to kind of think about it and we start talking about what that might look like? And we got such a kick out of it. We just started laughing as we discussed what that might look like with our injuries. And it was the funniest thing. And I was so grateful for that out of the box conversation, really just kind of talking about the elephant in the room, right? But we did it with humor and lightheartedness, and we addressed it, and we're like, that would be really funny and really hard to do. And what a way to bond during a hard time. It was just such a comforting feeling to be able to laugh through a delicate topic and sometimes a challenging topic when there are injuries and you still want to address intimacy, to be able to find the humor and to laugh about it together, right? Like we're both in this. We're united in this sucky situation. But what can we actually do with a collaborative mindset? We can make sure to increase our attention to affection during this time, right? Like you may not be able to be sexually intimate during this time. You may not be able to have intercourse while there's injuries, but there's other things that can still keep you guys close, right? So depending on where the injuries are, that's something to consider, but increasing physical touch can really go a long way, even if it's not like sexual, right? Like we're staying away from the genitals, maybe we need to, but still being able to increase physical touch, hugs, holding hands, just being able to lean in close, cheek to cheek, a hand on the shoulder, like, hey, I'm here for you. I got you. We're going to get through this, can really still increase intimacy, even if you can't be sexually intimate in the same way. I also want to remind everybody of the word outer course, right? Maybe intercourse is not always available, but there's still ways to have pleasure without intercourse. And so that's something to consider. Again, something we don't always talk about, but something to really consider. And especially if we know that most of the female pleasurable nerves are not on the inside of the vagina, but can be found in the clitoris, then that becomes a great possibility to still have pleasure during injuries. We can also increase our compassion, like just make a decision. I'm going to have way more compassion on myself during this time, way more compassion for my spouse during this time. That leads to something really beautiful, which is we can have way more appreciation and gratitude for our blessings and for our spouse. Man, I made a decision with my husband's injuries. Like, I'm going to have so much compassion on my husband right now. He is going to be miserable. He is going to have physical pain, but he's also going to be miserable because he's going to be like just having to rest. And he's usually a busybody and likes to be active. And so he's going to be going stir crazy. So I need to have a ton of compassion on him when he's not himself and appreciate all that he usually does do and can do. And I think also he's really appreciating all the things that he has the ability to do because right now he can't do those things. And so he is feeling more grateful for the blessings of what his body can do, the blessings of him wanting to be active in life. And during this downtime, all of our appreciation for those things and for our blessings has very much increased. And that is a great place to be. It feels amazing. It is good for our mental health and it's good for our emotional health as well. And here's the thing that is a secret. And that is that when we're able to feel, especially for women, appreciation and gratitude for our spouse, it actually can help with our desire to be intimate. We don't have to go and say, I need to be in the mood right now. I have to feel sexual right now. Turn it on, right? Flip the switch. We don't have to do that. But if we say, you know what, feeling appreciative and feeling gratitude for my spouse, that's a bridge. That is a stepping stone that can really lead to a natural desire to want to be closer and to want to be intimate. So if we're able to increase appreciation and gratitude, man, that is a wonderful bridge to get on that can easily lead to that increased desire for intimacy. Another idea would be, as we are thinking about collaboration, is to spend time together getting nostalgic, right? Think about your dating days, the things that you did, the things that attracted you to one another. Talk about those things, relive them, live in those memories, because as you do that, you're going to feel better right then and there. You're going to feel more relief. You're going to feel more loving and maybe even get the butterflies again, right? Talk about what it was like when you guys made out. Did you make out in some cool places, or what was your favorite makeout session? What were the details of that? As you think about these things, bring back making out, right? Maybe you can't make out right now. Like I know for my husband, like part of his lips are super burned, right? A lot of his face is burned right now. Like kissing and making out is not an option for us right now. But for those who don't have face injuries, maybe like consider making out without touching the genitals, like make out for a long time, because that really increases arousal, especially for women. And believe it or not, I've been asking a lot of my female clients lately, like, have you ever felt your body in full arousal during a makeout session? Like spend 15 minutes, make out. making out and pay attention to your body, how it's responding. Can you feel the vagina swelling up? Can you feel the throbbing? Can you feel that desire, that craving of like, oh my gosh, my body wants more? Most of my female clients are like, no, I have never experienced that. I'm like, okay, there's still work to do, right? There's still so much room for improvement. That's a fun thing to experience. Most women don't enjoy sex because they never experience that. They're not experiencing their own arousal and their own craving and desire for it. Something for the husbands to consider is like, hey, if this changes your sex life for a little bit, if injuries do, don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, right? Because sometimes when you're able to go without sex, especially for women, they're like, wait a minute, maybe I do like it. Maybe I do want it. I haven't had it for a little bit. Man, I actually like it more than I thought. But if they don't ever go without it, they don't ever know that about themselves. So don't look at it as a bad thing, because when a woman knows that about herself, like I will miss it. I do miss it. It starts to change their mindset about sex. And this is a good thing, right? Instead of things getting worse, things could get better. So we can't necessarily jump to conclusions like, hey, if sex is off the table for a while, it really makes everything worse. No, not necessarily. It can make things better. A question to ask yourself for both the wife and the husband is, how turned on can the wife get? Right? What if this is a new time to discover new erogenous zones, right? Without going to the main and obvious ones, right? What about the top of the hands? What about the back of the knee? What about right behind the ear or the neck, right? What if we just said, hey, maybe sex is off the table for a little while during injuries? What about discovering new erogenous zones? Because the skin is the largest sex organ, but it's often neglected, right? Maybe only 3 parts of female skin is paid attention to, or maybe 1 part of the male skin. What if we just started exploring more there and say, like, let's discover some new erogenous zones? That is still a way to keep your intimacy alive while there are some injuries. But being able to say, how turned on can the wife get, is a great, fun experiment, right? Allow it to take time, allow the buildup to increase. Women need to experience that. It's a fun place to be. So this is a chance to really focus on female arousal while there are injuries, because it's not just about like the obvious genitals, right? This is thinking outside the box a bit. So one last thing to consider, there are some injuries that would definitely make orgasm a challenge and pleasure a challenge, especially if the leg muscles cannot relax. It's just harder for a woman to orgasm, right? She needs to be able to be in a state of relaxation. And if there are expectations to perform and still be pleasured and still have an orgasm, even during injuries, that creates the opposite of being in a state of relaxation. So really consider that, but again, allow it to give you an opportunity to explore female arousal and being able to have new experiences, new adventures when it comes to intimacy. And if a husband is still very interested in intimacy and sex, even with his own injuries or with the injuries of his wife, it's important to not monsterize him, right? Because that's just a natural drive that men have. And we don't have to think horrible thoughts about that, right? We don't have to say, ugh, still? He still wants it? Look at this situation. He still wants it. Is that all he can think about? He doesn't care. He doesn't consider me, right? We don't have to think any of those things. He may still have a sex drive, But we don't have to think horrible things about that. We could think, ooh, like he's still interested. He's still interested in me. That's amazing. Even with my injuries, he still is interested in me. He still wants to give me pleasure. Ooh, he's willing. He is a willing participant. That's sexy, right? He hasn't tuned out. He's still in the game. What if we were able to think like, ooh, he's willing? Maybe I could channel some of his sexual energy and we can go on this discovery adventure together where we really learn about my arousal, about female arousal. Oh, I can channel his sexual energy in that way. This gives the wife a chance to really advocate for her style of arousal. She can give her husband directions. Hey, you know, I I really love when you tickle the back of my knee. Like my body wants more of that. Let's do that for like the next 10 minutes and see how aroused I can get. Oh. Women, you can advocate for yourself. You can help channel your husband's sexual drive in a way that is healthy and positive and beneficial. You just have to think about it in that way. And that's the beauty of thought work and coaching. Now, if any of this is ringing a bell and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, I may need the eyes of a professional who is trained and skilled and can look at the details of what's going on with me and my spouse, and maybe they can see things that we don't see, please get on my website, shelly.andersoncoaching.com, and sign up for a free discovery session. And we can talk through things and see how coaching can really help you and really help you understand the intimacy trek and how it really solves for so many of these issues using the self-coaching model. So do that today, do that this week for yourself, and really consider some of these tips when it comes to injuries so you'll know what to do either if you're experiencing one now or if one comes up in the future. Because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you will join me again next week.